Can you hear me, Joe?
Yes.
Okay, great.
The Virginia company that Maureen McDonald had gone to some trade shows with, and we all know how badly that all came falling apart there. So we will keep an eye on what's going on in Miami. Meanwhile, at your kitchen table, inflation went up again today, and we're going to get into that now, and we're going to talk about things that really matter. Here in Virginia, we have a Senate race and a House of Delegates race that seem fixated on which Democratic Party candidate can kill more babies more quickly and who is more of an abortionist. Meanwhile, Dominion's energy rates are going up. The city of Charlottesville, our flagship city, 7% increase. Poverty rates, almost 25% of the people who live in the city can't make enough money to make ends meet. But we're going to debate abortion and these sorts of things. So to kick us off to talk about this is Elaine Parker from the Job Creators Network. Elaine, thank you for taking some time out with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Joe.
I appreciate it. And so far, that's two of us who have not been indicted by any federal prosecutors, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Well, I appreciate you taking some time. So talk about the inflation going up again, and let's talk about the cumulative impact that this is having on American families who really, at this point, 3 hots and a cot in a federal penitentiary is starting to sound like a pretty good economic deal to some of them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the Consumer Price Index, or the CPI, was announced today, and we follow this every month, and everyday ordinary Americans may not follow this report and the announcement as closely as we do, but they certainly feel it every month. And what it shows this month is that the fight with inflation is very far from over. Inflation came in rising at 4%. But the core inflation, which is when you take out kind of the volatile stuff like food and energy, went up by 5.3% year over year. And, that's a lot of numbers to throw at you, but here's what it means. What it means is that inflation overall, core inflation, is still outpacing what people make. So that means that real wages are falling and Americans are getting poorer and living standards are declining. And that is what this presidency will be known as forever, is the presidency of declining real wages and declining living standards as a result of this persistent inflation.
Well, and is that a little bit of why? And I hear the cynics out there saying, "Well, that's why we want to focus on the Miami indictments, and that's why we want to focus on documents being shown to reporters." Because at the end of the day, I mean, I've even been approached by people, Elaine, who say, "Well, Joe, why are these leftists still flogging the idea of white supremacy?" Well, because the failed economies in all these inner cities are either due to their failed leadership, which is what it really is, or they have to make up a boogeyman under a white sheet somewhere. And I think that that's what they're doing, is they're continuing to come up with new and innovative ways to point a fire hose at the American people, so they don't stop and say, whoa, 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 how come I can't buy a loaf of bread anymore, Elaine? Is that a fair thing to point out?
I mean, I think it is, but at the end of the day, no matter what's happening down in Miami or in some school district across the country, or some new weird law in California, everybody goes grocery shopping and food is up 20%, and everybody has to fill up their gas tank, and gas is still elevated. It may have come down from the extreme highs of last summer, but we're still paying very high rates for gas. And all of this inflation disproportionately hurts our small business owners. I mean, Job Creators Network is an advocacy organization, and we represent the 30 million small business owners across the country. And I talk to small business owners every day. We have a podcast called Main Street Matters, and I interview small business owners about what they're feeling. And we have a national poll called the SBIQ, the Small Business IQ. And our small business owners are telling us that inflation is the biggest worry they have. And 2/3 of them tell us in the poll that they actually worry that the economic conditions could force them to close their doors. So while these headlines may paint very rosy pictures, when you scratch the surface just a little bit and look a little bit deeper and talk to those people who are on the front lines, you realize that they really are hurting.
Well, and go into that a little bit, because I think what you're seeing here also is not just the consumer price index, but the producer price index. That's been creeping up, and that doesn't get the front page of USA Today. That doesn't get, but that's where your employer calls you in on a Friday afternoon and says, we just, in order to keep going, I just can't afford to keep you anymore. And that's even harsher than inflation, because inflation's just eating away at your take-home pay. Eventually, it eats away at your ability to have take-home pay, doesn't it, Elaine?
Yeah, that's right, Joe. We're like two peas in the pod, because this was my next point, is the producer price index.
Sorry, I shouldn't have read ahead. Those were classified documents you showed me.
Exactly. I wave them around. But the producer price index did show last month that prices are accelerating again for business owners. The new report comes out tomorrow, so we'll have to see how things are looking again. But, I interviewed on my podcast this morning a small business owner in West Palm Beach. She owns a restaurant. And, she is still dealing with supply chain problems. She's still, her prices are still going up. She gave me a couple of examples. So she owns a Cuban restaurant in West Palm Beach, and she makes very good mojitos. That's kind of what they're known for. But the cost of limes, which you must have in that recipe to make it taste good, has tripled
Oh my God.
in cost by the
Holy
box.
cow. And my wife likes margaritas. I'm in trouble.
Exactly. And so she has had to substitute limes in her mojitos. You can imagine the customers are probably not that happy with that. But meat has doubled in cost. And she's trying to pass some of these costs on to her consumers, but they're very price conscious.
Sure.
So it's such a balancing act. And the last question I asked her today, I said, of every dollar that you bring in, how much do you get to keep? And she said about 5 cents.
Oh my gosh.
5 cents of every dollar she gets to keep. And she said, and of that, I have to put, kind of a reserve for the emergencies. She said, we own our building. We have to be ready for something a piece of equipment that breaks, or a hole in the roof, or, some problem with the air conditioning system. She said, we always have to be ready for that too. And so when you think about the profit margins of these small business owners, restaurant industry in particular,
Mm-hmm.
the inflation that we've been experiencing for the last 2 years under this administration, because of all of this reckless spending, it disproportionately hurts our small business owners. I mean, you don't think General Motors is hurting like this and looking at the cost of a box of limes
No.
when they're figuring out their profit margins, do you?
Well, and there's also the point I'd like to make on this is the mojito bar isn't going to get called too big to fail and have some government subsidy show up, or a bag of money to protect the half a dozen jobs she may have there at a restaurant. Elaine, that's a bigger part of it, because Milton, faster than you can say Milton Friedman, what is supposed to happen in the American economy is a free movement in between wealthy and poor. You could be poor and figure out something and become wealthy, or you could become wealthy and your idiot sons ruin everything and you become poor. And that's how capital stirs around. But ever since Too Big to Fail, we've really sort of put a wall around the wealthy and especially the big business shareholders, and protected them from ever having to worry about collapsing. So that now what we're seeing on the poverty on the other end, the Main Street side, is poverty that has now also been kind of permanently put there because there's no flow back and forth in the economy. Elaine, does that make any sense to you?
Absolutely. I mean, this economy is tough, but our entrepreneurs are
Mm-hmm.
resourceful, and they know that the government isn't going to bail them out. They're not too big to fail, and frankly, that is why our poll is showing that 2/3 of our small business owners, as I mentioned earlier, are concerned that they're going to have to close their doors because of the economic conditions, because of the inflation, because of the cost pressures, because of the labor shortages. All of those things are disproportionately hurting these small business owners. And then you add in 10 straight months of interest rate increases because of this inflation. Now, most economic minds don't think that the Fed is going to increase interest rates this month, but it doesn't mean they're done.
Yeah.
No one thinks they're done for the year. But what that has done is it's destabilized our smaller community banks.
Mm-hmm.
3 bank failures this year so far. And those are all at the regional and community level, which is where 60% of our small business owners go to get
Mm-hmm.
their funding. They don't go to the big banks. Whereas, some sort of calculation in a computer kicks them out and rejects them for whatever reason, they go to the regional banks
Well,
in their communities.
And they also trust them more, especially in communities that are more closely related to immigration into this country, especially in areas like Miami, where we're watching this trial go on, where they come from places where you don't trust the big banks because they're connected with the government. So somebody that lives in your neighborhood starts a bank and has an ability to finance your business, that's a much bigger deal, isn't it?
That's true. And to see these community banks suffering and becoming destabilized from this just rapid interest rate increase for community banks that are located in minority communities, they're usually the ones lending
Mm-hmm.
to minority small business owners. And those minority small business owners are employing minority employees and helping that economy survive and grow. And as those banks start to become destabilized, it's a real problem. And what is that stemming from? Well, it's stemming from the Too Big to Fail came again,
Mm-hmm.
because the government basically said they wouldn't bail out the regional banks. They'd let them fail, but they would bail out the big banks. And so what happened? Billions of dollars of depositors moved their money in mass to the
Mm-hmm.
big banks in just a matter of months. And that is just killing these small regional banks.
And they're
And I
more
know
than
Mr. Wonderful said, we don't need community banks, but we do. It's
Yes, we
because
do.
he's too big.
Well, and
He's
that's the thing.
forgotten what it means.
Didn't we go from small banks are good to four banks will be fine in this country, and that's a dangerous place also for the amount of control the government has over those four banks. Elaine, last one for you. We watched the Congress fail to really address the debt ceiling and just the spending and continued spending. How much more can we stand of debt ceiling increases and no energy resources because those double pressures seem to be killing us? And I know we have to let you go.
Well, look, I applaud Speaker McCarthy for at least starting this fight, but we have a long way to go. We just couldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good in this case, but we have to do more. We have to win back the other branches of government. We have to win back the Senate so that we can conquer this debt problem, because we're going to have a debt crisis.
Well, Elaine, thank you so much. Elaine Parker, it's the Job Creators Network. Thank you for everything you guys do and the podcast that you keep and keeping those small business owners, because that really is going to be the future of the United States, because eventually we can't protect these Wall Street traded companies anymore, and we're going to need people stepping back in and making furniture and clothes and fixing cars and building houses locally. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks so much.
Let's he does a decent job, but one of the things that Abrams brought up was intent, and apparently that's the interpretive dance that all these folks have been doing right now, which is this idea of what was the intent. And I guess the audio recording, although now we find out that there are 4 separate audio recordings regarding Hunter Biden and intent there that have not been released. So we'll see what goes on with there. But I talked to a legal expert myself who said the issue here is chain of custody when it comes to Hunter Biden. While you and me, we may all know about laptops, a lawyer will simply say, well, who had the laptop before the FBI did? Well, we're told it was Rudolph Giuliani, and we were told it was this guy. But do you have any proof that there was anyone else involved in this lab? So, immediately, and it's our judicial system. It is what is able to be entered into evidence there. Do we have Ben? Ben Knotts is going to join us. He's the legislative director for Americans for Prosperity of Virginia. I want his thoughts on the economic stuff we were talking about, but also the regional greenhouse gas initiative, because I believe that ties in, if you missed it last week, the Virginia Air Quality Board. Yes, we have one of those, because if we didn't, the air might not be breathable, voted to give the governor the final okie dokie to get out of the regional greenhouse gas cash transfer fund there. Ben, it's good to see you again. How are you doing there, my friend? What's going on?
Hey, buddy. Hope you're having a great day. It's beautiful weather here in Goochland County. I can't complain.
Well, there you go. And anyone who can say Goochland County without smiling isn't trying. So let's talk about the issue of energy. We were just talking with Elaine Parker from the Job Creators Network about the consumer price and then the producer price index. Both of them are directly connected. The city of Charlottesville, our flagship city, just announced that there's going to be a 7.5% increase in their utility rates. I don't think anyone's getting a 7.5% raise at their job. Certainly, considering most of our job creating here has been convenience stores. Ben, talk about the impact of the regional greenhouse gas initiative on energy costs in Virginia, and at least in some good news, this is a break for the people who are suffering.
Yeah, it's an important issue. I grew up in the midst of poverty in Appalachia, down in Wyoming County, West Virginia. I was an hour from a Walmart.
See, that's
Energy.
funny. You see, I would have pegged you for Brooklyn with that accent.
When people ask me where I'm from, I always say New York, and their faces always like, but yeah. We grew up, in the average pay around there, like the minimum, like the average wage is around 15,000 a year. And we've got energy inefficient homes, and you talk about energy bills. I mean, that eats up the majority of people's income.
Mm-hmm.
And so any increase, I don't care if you're wealthy and your bill goes up 10% in Northern Virginia, you might not notice that. But when you're in, abject poverty, any increase is making a decision. First, it might be trivial things like, oh, I got to cancel my Netflix account. But then it gets to stuff like, can I afford my son's baseball jersey? All these different things that happen because all these great ideas folks have that are great if you are wealthy. It's really bad for regular people. And R.G.G.I, what it did is it created a cap and trade system. And if you're not familiar with that, basically it just means that there has to be an auction where all these energy providers have to spend more money to provide services to regular folks.
Mm-hmm.
Any increase to the bottom line results with an increase in price. And so back in 2020, the General Assembly decided that they wanted R.G.G.I, but they thought, all right, we don't want to just mandate a R.G.G.I through the legislature. We're going to, punt this to the executive level, and we're going to do it through the administrative branch. And we're going to allow the Air Pollution Board to decide whether or not we're going to join R.G.G.I. And they assumed that the Air Pollution Board would always be aligned with that point of view. What happened is that with the Youngkin administration,
mm-hmm.
The Air Pollution Board said R.G.G.I is a bad deal. R.G.G.I is raising costs on people the worst possible time in the midst of all the inflation we're dealing with. This does not make sense. In particular, Virginia, if you're somebody and you say, I want a better job, the best way to get a better job is to make companies that offer jobs want to make Virginia home. And when you create higher energy costs, they choose whether they're going to go to North Carolina, West Virginia, Tennessee. They're going to look at that and say, how much is my energy bill going to be if I employ 1,000 people at a factory in, say, Abingdon versus if I just move them a little bit over to Bristol?
Yeah.
So this is a good thing for Virginia. It's going to pulling out is a great thing for everybody's utility bills. But it's an uphill battle, Joe. I'll tell you that.
Well, I know that Governor Northam had his secret plans that he, wind farms everywhere, and he kept them pretty tightly wrapped under his white sheets. But eventually, word got out about the energy plans, the Virginia 2050 plan, and all these things that were going to drive up energy costs. And they even told us sure, this is going to make it cost more. But think of all the people in sub-Saharan Africa. And no explanation as to what making our energy bills more expensive was going to do for these folks, and then little by little we start to find out that it really is just more about shuffling everything around, and it doesn't, Ben, at the end of the day, do a darn thing towards making the air cleaner or the water cleaner or the forest more robust.
That what you're talking about really bothers me. I'm a lobbyist, and I work with, at Americans for Prosperity. My goal is to work with anyone to do good, and I work with far left lobbyists that we find common ground on, and I work with anybody. And one of the things that bugs me is that when we're talking to folks in the General Assembly about this issue, they have I have friends that see eye to eye on some things. Like we have friends who are supporters of R.G.G.I, and they were instrumental in helping us with restoring SEC oversight of the cost of rates, basically how much you're going to be charged.
Right.
In that same session, they basically just gave utilities a free for all of how much they could charge people to do a lot of these things that you were talking about, like windmills and solar panels and all this kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
it frustrates me because they understood that although the utility could make a case that, hey, this is going to benefit the environment, they saw that the utility was going to put the regular Joe on the hook, somebody that doesn't have a lobbyist. And they stood, with us in the General Assembly to say, we need SCC oversight to make sure that we're not going to be overpaying for energy. And that's why it frustrates me so much, is because they see very clearly on this one issue, but yet with this issue where it's plain as day that the ratepayer is the one who's going to
Mm-hmm.
suffer for this, because the utility can't eat the cost. They can't just pull money out of a magic hat. They're
Well,
going to eat the cost. They're going to pass it down to the regular Joe.
but Ben, if you take it out of the government's hands and just let it be in between the ratepayer and the electric utility, what are they going to run on? I mean, if you really want to understand why they don't do anything, it's because they all see these things as, what am I taking off of my next campaign flyer? And by that, I mean the positive ones, not the ones I write about my opponent. Ben Knotts is on with us from Americans for Prosperity of Virginia. When we talk about the consumer and producer price index, the cost of energy is such a big part of that, because when a producer has to sit down with raw materials and make something, if you're raising that cost 7, 8, 9%, that's money he's taking away from his employees, which drives up unemployment, which drives up people's need for government assistance, which leads to more taxation, which leads to more inflation, so on, and so on. Ben, why is it so hard to grasp this on a political level?
Well, I don't want to. Again, I'm as the lobbyist, I always say, it's lawmakers really trust, credible lobbyists that come in with interest groups. So when I walk in, I have 100,000 activists in Virginia that I represent, the regular guy, the kind of person that I wish I had known existed when we were in the middle of nowhere and everything was going to pot because of bad policies in Charleston, West Virginia. That's who I represent when I'm in the General Assembly. But there are other people that represent very influential groups, and they have agendas that they're pushing, and they're worried about elections. Elections are happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
And folks are and lawmakers are very attuned to what the needs of their constituents are. Energy bills are a huge problem. And I don't like talking about, energy policy. I like to talk about energy bills. If you
Sure.
talk to the regular person down in Churchill, or you talk to somebody down in Abingdon, or you talk to somebody in Roanoke or Charlottesville, they always talk about how can they pay their bills. Policy leads to either lower bills or higher bills. Now, I just want to be clear. A lot of companies have a intrinsic value that higher bills will produce greater profits. There are a number of things that I fight on in Virginia that would lower the cost of healthcare, that would lower the cost of education, that would lower the cost of everything across the board, but they oppose it because it undermines their bottom line, because they build a business model around the access they have in the government.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have a great opportunity to go talk to your lawmaker right now to tell them, I don't like this stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like Reggie. I don't want this kind of stuff because it's raising my bills.
Yep.
It's not about, like, look, political science used to be something you studied when you were in college.
Mm-hmm.
Now political science is when the science becomes politicized to support an agenda.
Exactly.
And you can look at it across the board for cultural issues to energy issues to, the pandemic, but science becomes politicized to reinforce a point of view, not to disprove or affirm it from a scientific empirical level. We have a real issue right now on when it comes to energy, because all the data and facts show one thing is true. If we wanted to eliminate a lot of our carbon emissions through energy innovation, we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
We could do it with modular nuclear units. There's a whole case for hydrogen, all kinds of different really cool things, whether it's, we got landfills, Joe, you got a landfill in Charlottesville, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
Those produce emissions, methane emissions. You can capture those emissions, and you can create energy from those emissions, eliminating that carbon footprint, sell it back to the grid. and increase our energy abundance
Yep.
there with no carbon consequence whatsoever. And yet it's stagnant in the General Assembly too often, and it's so frustrating to watch it happen.
Well, and that's the problem is I think we're counting on politicians where the economy could have been building this out a long time ago. Somebody says, hey, some guy owns a lot of land in Staten Island, New York, which, by the way, is where New York's landfill is. That Staten Island is the old Dutch word for New York's landfill. And so you go there and you just start tapping wells in there, and every Staten Islander becomes a Saudi oil prince because you're creating that much hydrogen from the decomposing organic material. But all that said, look at how quickly Dominion turned tail on Governor Northam's 50-50 plan, Ben, as a proof to what you're saying, and said to Governor Youngkin, hey, can we get permission to build some more of these natural gas plants, and we'll start working on these new, modular nuclear facilities as well? I mean, it didn't take a bat in the eye. It certainly didn't seem like it took a whole lot of lobbying, Ben, did it?
No, you're proving my point here. That's the most frustrating thing about it, is that the political winds blow one way or the other all the time, and I'll say this, good lobbyists, they're always trying to figure out what they can pass with where the way the political winds are blowing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling the folks that are listening to you right now, listening to me right now, is that if you want to make sure that the policy follows the way you want it to, the political winds need to be blowing that direction consistently. A lot of the ideas that lobbyists will agree to under the dome, they agree to them because the wind's blowing that direction. In 2020, no one thought Governor Youngkin, nobody thought there was going to be a Governor Youngkin.
Yeah.
They basically thought for the next 10, 15 years
Oh, yeah.
that Ralph Northam and Mark Herring were going to be making the decisions.
Yeah.
Putting that power in the executive branch ensured that there will be no disagreement. We might lose the House, we might lose the Senate, they said, but we can trust we'll get the state or the executive branch. And it was a miscalculation politically because the winds changed.
Right.
You are listening right now. You have the power. If you can just influence one person, let me challenge you. Let me just challenge your listeners real quick. If you challenge 5 people a day, and one of those every 5 people you challenge passes that challenge on around one issue, it's like 1 billion people would be impacted by that. The order of magnitude that you are capable of, you have to understand how powerful you are. So I encourage you, if you're listening to this, and this is an issue that's near and dear to your heart, paying your energy bill, take opportunity to share that with somebody and say, we can have more affordable energy if we make sure that we just let the energy producers do what their company was supposed to do,
right,
which is produce energy. That's it. That's it in a nutshell.
Well, and it's interesting because we watched it with the constitutional amendment on property rights. I almost wonder if the State Board of Election is doing us disservice. And I'm going to throw this fanciful thing out here, Ben, and I'm going to let you go. But I want your reaction to it because, a good West Virginian like you will probably grasp exactly what I'm talking about here. On Election Day, and yes, I mean one day where we all go vote. But for now, during election time, instead of going in and voting for people, because that gets messy, we should go into a polling place and vote for policies. Do I want my electric bill lower? Do I want my fuel-efficient vehicles to cost less? Do I want my employer to be able to hire more people? Do I want my taxes lower? Do I want my constitutional rights protected? That kind of thing. Or do I want free housing? Do I want free health care? And vote for the policies, and then at the State Board of Elections, maybe then they'll match those policies up with the politicians that support them and say, okay, well, Joe Thomas supports the majority of the policies we voted for. And I say this because when we voted for just the policy of sovereignty on your private property, it carried the state overwhelmingly. And yet they were still claiming this was a blue state. Yet the most core conservative principle, sovereignty on your private property ownership, dominated. And that's why I wish we could get away from the personalities of these elections and just go and look and see who's got the policies we want.
It's very important. I'll tell you this is, as a lobbyist, I have friends who are left of center, like I said.
Sure.
And we can work together on a lot of stuff. one of my buddies that I respect a lot, and I'm sure if I ever do anything outside of this, they'll use this clip to undermine, but I don't care. Is Delegate Sam Razul,
Hmm.
and on eminent domain, like Sam is more conservative than I don't know anybody more conservative on eminent domain issues than Sam Razul. And that's something that I think it's important that you don't look for partisan majorities. Now, sometimes and oftentimes is you will have a policy majority because you have a partisan majority.
Hmm.
But an educated voter, do you want to be an educated voter, or do you just want to be somebody that votes the party line? It's important to be an educated voter. What is an educated voter? An educated voter says, these are the things that I want passed. Who is more likely to sign them? Who is more likely to vote for them? I believe in policy majorities.
Yeah.
I will support I would vote for my dog if my dog would vote for my bills, and she had a good chance of getting 50% of the vote. And honestly, my dog would probably do it, even though she's a
Sure.
little bit of a jerk.
Well, yeah, it's all right. We voted for jerks before. Ben Knotts, Americans for Prosperity, Virginia. He's their lobbyist. He's their ear bender and arm twister, and I appreciate it, Ben. And we'll get it right. We're part of the way there. Like you mentioned, every single seat in the Virginia General Assembly is up for election this year. So it doesn't get any more profound than this opportunity to make this kind of change. I hope you have a beautiful rest of the afternoon, Ben, and thanks for taking some time out with us.
God bless you and your listeners. All right, act on it now. We ain't got much time left. Come on.
That's right. I mean, how many more days can we put up with this? I appreciate you guys being here as well, and thank you for taking some time out. One more time before we go. Let's go back to
my producer in my ear
about the case.
About the case.
Okay, well,
Miami
that's a little different.
here.
But who's going to
something's
watch when he
going on
talks to
there,
Walt?
so-
Not So having said that,
so
Dan,
that's
and
just
John, you know from covering
a
Donald
little
Trump.
bit. The crowd seeming to have dissipated as well outside of the courthouse, where a candidate, the leader for a major political party's candidate for any elected office, it doesn't matter whether it's Commonwealth's attorney or board of supervisors, having your opponent arrested just happened here. So for us, we will wrap it up for today, and we'll be back here tomorrow for the afternoon constitutional. I hope you can join us as well for that, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And until then, for all of us here at govoversight.org, Chris Horner, the folks, first person to really pull back the curtain on, what we were just talking about with Ben, that none of this stuff is about cleaning up the environment. It's all about forcing people to buy things from people that they couldn't sell in their open market. So that said, until tomorrow at 3 for govoversight.org, drop by, give us a contribution. Our favorite four-letter word is FOIA, and we look behind the curtains to see who's doing what. For all of us here at the Government Accountability and Oversight Group, my name is Joe Thomas. Thank you for spending the Constitutional with us here from our flagship station, WCHV in Charlottesville. So long. Thanks for all the fish.